web is just one component of the overall digital experience. Of course, there's many other things like email and social components to it. But the website is typically the first thing that people want to take a look at when they're looking to improve their engagement with their clients, to improve their conversion in many ways, to drive higher levels of engagement for their partners and business development within the organization. And so today we want to tackle some kind of key areas that we feel will add value, less in a strategic manner, because we have a lot of webinars that you may have seen that are really focused around some of the strategic aspects of digital marketing. This one focuses more on things that are tangible that you can do in the short term, in some cases some quick fixes, in some cases some points to keep in mind as you're thinking forward to perhaps a redesign, perhaps you're looking at a new CMS implementation at some point in time. So we want to tackle a few items. We've got about 6 key subjects we want to tackle. And the first subject we want to look at is the user experience. And you may have not heard the audio earlier, but I'm going to go through some of this fairly quickly. User experience really does have a huge effect on how people perceive your organization, how they perceive your brand, how they're able to engage with you. Because in many cases, outside of perhaps meeting someone from a relationship perspective, actually shaking your hand, the website provides that first engagement they have with your organization. And it's that first impression and that first taste that's left in the person's mouth about what your organization is like. Recently, Gartner did, or I should say Forrester did, a poll, and that's actually a fairly deep survey. It's more than a poll, than 1,500 websites from companies around the world. And this is something they do annually. And they've got fairly rigorous approach to how they do this, and they have fairly consistent questions that they use year over year. What they found is that this year they've got one of the lowest scores in terms of how well these companies' sites actually meet some of the kind of baseline requirements from a user experience perspective. And it really shows you how what is happening is many of these sites are staying static while the expectation of clients and customers is moving forward very quickly. And we see user experience as actually being a combination of a variety of things. Really a combination of branding and usability, how easy it is for people to use the site, and the information architecture, which refers to how the content is structured, how it's presented on the pages, and then of course design, which allows us to put the window dressing around all that information and really kind of provide something that's compelling from a visual and aesthetic perspective. All of this really points to the satisfaction that people get when they come to the site. Are they getting the information they need? Were they able to find that information quickly? Are they able to kind of achieve the goals they had in mind when they first came to your site? And was it fun? Or was it inconvenient? Was it difficult? So those are the things that we're after when we're thinking about user experience. Some of the things that we find kind of almost very consistently as we engage with various firms, particularly those that have not really had an opportunity to do a major kind of uplift of their look and feel and their overall information architecture, those that have been kind of stuck on perhaps an older content management system, and one, of course, it's very difficult to get out of that until you make a major commitment to get out of that. We find that a lot of these organizations are running into kind of simple things that really do affect the experience. One is just too much information on the page, lack of white space, which are almost like the guardrails around elements of information on the page to kind of guide a person's visual perspective down a page. A misalignment of the sitemap, really referring to how the site is organized, and misalignment from what people would expect to find first, what's most important to them when they come to the site. In many cases, with both the navigation and the menu systems that we find is that information tends to be buried, where you may have to click through several layers deep. There may be awkward hierarchical menus that are being used. They're difficult for certain users to kind of use and navigate. And then finally, a huge component of a culprit here is search. The ability for search to actually return results that you would expect, the search interface, the consistency of how people engage with search, all are areas that we find that are common problems in and around legal websites. Now let's tackle just a few of these. And we're not going to spend a lot of time. I'm going to just point out a few key things to keep in mind. So from a sitemap perspective, which is really around the organization of and the structure of your site, you know, does the structure of your site reflect what people really come to first? You know, is that what you made most prominent? So you see up at the top here, we pulled just a high-level menu, and you can see people, practices, publication, news. And this is a customer we've recently done work for. We completely restructured and reorganized the high-level sitemap and even some of the lower-level components of that, where we realized that what many people call their people, their attorneys, their professionals, that is the #1 place that people go to when they come to your site. So why not bring it right out front? Practices being that second item. And then finally, things like publications, news, events, and so on. So creating the proper order that promotes the correct engagement, and again, makes it convenient, it's natural, it feels right, and just thinking through those things ahead of time as you move into a restructure of your site really can make a difference. Navigation, now I took navigation here from a non-legal site, OfficeMax, but there's plenty of examples that I'm sure you've seen of this notion of mega menus. Now, mega menus really solve a specific problem, and it is around exposing people to all the options they have without having to go down each one of those little drop-downs. We've experienced sites where they may have 2 additional drop-down links, and so you have to kind of go down and then back up, and if you didn't find what you want, you've got to go down that next one. It's almost like going through a maze in the cornfield to get to what you want. So the objective of these mega menus is really to kind of expose all of that in a very flat structure and say, hey, here's what's behind door #1. Here's what's behind door #2. This is what you're going to find. And what we'll do in many cases, in this case, I think OfficeMax has got it at the right level. They've exposed, for instance, writing instruments, and then the subcategories, pens, pencils below that. So you have basically 2 levels below office supplies, and that's it. Now, when you get into pens, perhaps, you might have another level, but that's managed at the page level. So right here, we provide people a really clear understanding what they're going to get and what to expect once they get past here. And that makes a big difference in just making it easy for people to understand how to get around your site. Other areas that we like to focus on with firms is around the structure of the page. And that's a combination of a variety of things. That's, you know, in the discipline of what we call information architecture, which is taking chunks of information and properly structuring them on the page so they make sense. Here we have a bio, and I'm not going to mention the firm's name, but here we've got a bio from a firm, and I think it's an example of what not to do from the perspective that we have a lot of information on the page. It's difficult to read. It's not particularly aesthetically pleasing from that perspective either. But in addition to that, one thing that we really look at is around the readability. How easy is it for people to read this content? We see there's quite a bit what we call a wall of text right there that kind of overwhelms you. Fortunately, we do have the main information at the top, but it's really surrounded with a lot of details here that one of the things is, where should your eye start? and where should you go next? That's one of the questions we always ask when we have a lot of information on the page is like, where do you want a person to start? Where do you want their eye to follow and go? Well, let's take a look at another example in which both the structure of the page, the amount of content, the use of even the colors of the fonts, of the topography on the page, provides kind of subtle hints of where you want to draw your eye. So here in this case, you know, Don Daniel, his name is very prominent. And then right below that, we've got the key contact information, which is his phone. Instead of providing the email address, they provide icons up there. So another alternative to literally putting information up there. And then one thing that we're a big fan of, and we've seen a lot of sites where you get onto a bio page like this, you've got a list of links over there that take you to accolades and a variety of other things that we all know. The usual sets of information out there that are associated with a bio, and we get lost in some other part of the site. Well, here, what they've done, I think it's done it very beautifully, is they've provided the overview, they've provided some basic tabs at the top, so his affiliations, his honors, his speeches, and obviously they could add additional tabs there, but you're not moving off the page, right? We're staying on that same page, and it really provides a much cleaner experience. Then over to the right, we've got this great photo. It's bright, it's clean, it creates a setting of where he is, and then below that, in a very compact fashion, the ability to just cycle through in this panel, you know, its background from an education, employment perspective, and so on. So I think this is a really great example of a well-executed page in general that follows all of those key things that we want to look at. Plenty of white space, good use of fonts, different sizes, different colors, different shades, to kind of guide your eye to different things. If you notice, the text is not competing with the image. Outside of his name, his image and his name are the two things that stand out, and then your eye kind of moves down the page, which is exactly what we want to do. So let's talk about biographies. We all know that biographies are the key thing that we are, for lack of a better word, pitching or merchandising when we do a website for a law firm. It is what people come for because your product, if you will, as we all know, are your attorneys in their value. Here's something that was done in a recent study. 45% of current in-house counsel, your clients, review their attorney's biography periodically. I don't know what periodically meant here, but I would imagine that, you know, it's kind of like going to your LinkedIn page. You want to see what some of your colleagues are doing. Well, if these folks are paying you good money for work, they want to understand, you know, what is my attorney doing? What is he learning? What other matters is he involved in? I want to understand things about him or her. So another one, don't know if you folks know the great Jake's blog. This gentleman writes a great blog about legal websites, and I think he has a lot to offer. One of the things he's done for some of his customers in this case was go through and do some analytics, literally, you know, the Google Analytics, Omniture, and so on. He found that on average, 56% of all traffic of a cross-section of all his customers go to the attorney bio. So we know they're important. We know that it's something we need to focus on. But why is that? Well, at eDynamic, we do a lot of work with a variety of industries, legal being one of them. We do high-tech and so on. One of the things that we look at is this notion of buying cycle, and I'm not going to spend much time on it. But we really like to think about how the client or the customer in certain industries goes about their thought process when they kind of purchase a service, purchase a product, and so on. I did not come up with this. I found this, and I think it is kind of very accurately kind of describes what could happen, where when we start talking about how people engage, and this may be just one scenario. But the fact that they start looking at different firms, maybe they're looking to leave the firm they have. They've heard about perhaps various attorneys that would be ideal fit for them, so they begin to do their research via Google. Maybe they find a few other people that are similar in competitive firms, and they get before them kind of a set of bios that provide some kind of a side-by-side comparison. And as they filter through that, they begin to narrow that down to a short list of people and teams, perhaps, that they feel would work well for them. And of course, along the way, they're doing research. They're doing research on the bio page, they're reading the articles, they're looking at the accolades, they're going to their LinkedIn. They're doing all the things that you would do when you're buying a product or service. That finally resolves itself down to, kind of influencing and informing who they want to do business with. What we found is that one of the key opportunities that law firms have in terms of generating new business, both within existing accounts like your top 50, or also kind of down that pyramid, looking to do business development and get new clients in the door, is to get your attorneys out there from a findability perspective. And what we mean by findability specifically here is that they're easily found on Google, and making that happen is really not very difficult, but it does require some effort. It will require some effort from perhaps some of the practice teams, biz dev teams, to work with maybe some of the partners. Others may be a little bit more capable, if some of the younger folks who've been writing this type of thing on their own LinkedIn pages and so. But it's very important to know a couple things. So for instance, the first 150 characters within that description, let's say that bio description that you put up there, is what gets picked up by Google and really drives some of the keywords that will impact rankings when someone types in, corporate fraud or IP litigation. What is it that's going to drive that attorney to the top will be determined in those 150 characters. Then the other thing is using the right words. Be descriptive. Be differentiating. And this requires a little bit of wordsmithing. Sitting down, maybe doing a couple versions, sitting down in Microsoft Word, getting your 150 characters up there, and just beginning to kind of work through, and in your mind, just think about how that might come across if someone is entering a search term and how that might come through. The other thing to look at is that Google doesn't just look at the words you use. There's a lot of other things that we aren't going to cover today. So I'm not going to try to simplify all of it here, but there's a few key things. The other is driving up relevancy through inbound and outbound links. And that can be easily done through the bio pages by linking to articles that are perhaps outside in journals, other websites that link back to that person's bio page. All of this begins to drive up the ranking. So there's a couple key things to know here, and by doing that, it really can make a big difference in the overall results that you get. The other thing is just how you come across in the bio page. And I know there's a lot of information out there in terms of guidance and best practices. And there's a few things that we've seen, One, make it personal. And typically, if it can get at some level personal, you can also become differentiated. So you do not sound like every other person in the firm. The other thing is how that information is presented. Again, we're talking about information architecture now. How that information is organized on the page so it's in a way that is easily consumed by people. People's eyes are drawn to the appropriate things. Okay? And make things obvious. People shouldn't have to search for the information on the page. It should be in kind of the order in which people expect to find things. So those are common sense things, but often kind of lose that when we're in the midst of a redesign and so. Another thing that we feel makes a big impact, and it's becoming more prominent now, I think there's a lot more liberties that are taken around it, around the images that are used by firms. And depending on the overall culture, not only of the individual, kind of their personality, but the culture of the firm, you know, it may go a lot of different directions. And I think this is definitely open for internal discussions. I'm not going to make any recommendations there. But what we will say is that this gives you a real opportunity to highlight not only the individual, but also give some background to the firm. You can see some of these pictures here, how perhaps these down here at the very bottom on the left, they're very flat. You know, you have the image of the person, but it really creates no context whatsoever. And even as we get up to this right side, top right, we begin to add some color, we need some background, some shading. It creates a bit more context, livens up the page. Now as we get to the middle one here, you can see that they've taken quite a few liberties. They're somewhat untraditional for law firms, but it creates a lot of context. It creates warmth. It really highlights individual personalities, and just the overall culture of the firm really comes through. Those are things we want to think about. Image, you know, the web is getting much richer. We know the resolution of monitors, people's laptops, everything is going up. Why not leverage that? Why not leverage that technology and the opportunity to communicate yourself visually? And this is a really great way to do it. And the other thing that I want to say is don't sacrifice on quality or the size of the image. You know, my laptop that I'm working off right now has got 1920 by 1080 resolution. It's very high. It's a full HD resolution. And we're going to see more of that happening. You think about the new iPad that came out and the resolution there. It's only moving in that direction. So don't shortchange yourself on small images of poor quality. Get the best, get them big, and really utilize some of the real estate that we now have within these machines. Here's something that I wanted to bring up, and it's somewhat controversial. We've had discussions with a variety of firms about it, but it's still something to keep in the back of your mind. There's what I call the Amazon attorney, only from the standpoint that Amazon has really set the bar for this notion of rating. All of us have gone to Amazon, downloaded a book for their Kindle, or purchased something there, and what's the first thing we do? You know, first we might sort by number of stars. Then we get to kind of narrow that down, and now we're starting to look at, you know, these are all 4.5, 5-star items. I like this one, and we begin to read about them, and then you begin to read the subtle differences. But we're thinking that this is very much a direction it may go for attorneys. It's going that way for doctors. It's going that way for dentists. It's going that way for a variety of other professional services type organizations. And I see that more of this might be possible in the future, and it definitely provides a way for you to connect with your audience. And it is a differentiator if you decided to step out and do this. Very few people are doing this. We've seen a few kind of smaller firms that feel that they're willing to take on that, I wouldn't call it risk, but exposure per se, and just try it. Many people are already on LinkedIn, and I think that will continue to be a ongoing way that people will be able to get feedback and get some accolades from colleagues and perhaps customers, and that might be kind of an off-firm website way of doing it. If you don't feel comfortable having it on your site, you know, definitely LinkedIn is a strong way to do it. And without a doubt, if they're going to come to your bio, they're going to come to your LinkedIn page as well. So let's move on to another subject that's near and dear to us, which is search. We find that search is one of the kind of prickly areas for a lot of firms. They've got perhaps some older search technologies. They haven't had a chance to change it. There's no way for them to update it. But the reality is that 90% of companies report that search is the #1 means of navigation on their website. Whether it is for you, that will be dependent upon the analytics we would have to take a look at, but clearly many of us go to a website, whether that is a service firm, product firm, etc. Search may be the first place we start. Some of us may be inclined to kind of follow kind of a hierarchical view and menu structure, but I think more and more people are feeling comfortable starting with search. 82% of users or visitors use site search to get the information they need, and that's very clear. So we've got a few key tenets around search that we feel are important. Here's an example of two sites. The site behind the one you see in the front is a law firm site, and I think they're doing a good job because they have search up there and it's obvious. Okay, it is where most people expect search to be. But the site at the front, and by the way, I would recommend going to Forrester.com if any of you folks are familiar with the Forrester organization. They've done a bang-up job on their website, and I think it is really the epitome of digital engagement. In search here, they've done a great job because it is huge. You cannot miss it. You know exactly where it is. It's big. It accommodates large search terms, long words, long names. And I think that's really the direction a lot of organizations are going outside of law right now, but I think that will make its way into many firm sites as we move forward, as search becomes really the preeminent way that people get the information quickly. There are companies, if you were to go to Intel.com, it's very much like a Google page. The first thing you come up is a beautiful background, and then you get the search box in the center very much like Google. And there's a reason for that. They immediately get you to the direction you want to go and allow you to filter down to the specifics. The other thing we want to say is from a kind of a user experience perspective, make sure that when you place search on the page, make it consistent, make the behavior consistent. Let people know if this is specifically people search, let them know. If it is general search, let them know. One of the things that we do when we work with firms, we take a close, hard look at the content. Many times we work with content repositories coming off of old Hubbard 1 implementations. I'm sure many of you would nod your heads and say, yep, understood. We've got one of those. Others have older CMS systems that they may have purchased many years ago or custom implementations. Either way, one of the things we do is start taking a look at the content. And we've got the typical things, we've got bios and publications, news, advanced practices, and so on. And what we see, obviously, is that some of the stuff is kind of hierarchical in nature. The About Us page and where to find us and all that stuff. It's kind of general hierarchy. You can order that in a hierarchy. Practices and the service in your departments, practices, service, and so on. That's all hierarchical. That's pretty well known that it is. But then we've got this content which referred to as flat content. It's like a whole stack of papers just thrown out on a bed or a table. You've got all these bios, you've got all these publications, and some of these organizations, you may have 1,000 to 2,000 bios. You may have 30,000 pubs. You may have, 10,000 news items. And what we want to do is be able to make it easy for people to kind of go through that. Now, with the hierarchical content, typically that's handled through menus and information architecture. People kind of make their way through. We bring up a nice mega menu, as we discussed earlier. People see where they can go, and they go down there, and they do what they need to do. In the case of biographies, in the case of publications, if you don't know exactly where you're headed, if you're not typing in John Smith, or even if you are, you might have 7 John Smiths. Don't know what John Smith looks like, but you knew he was an IP attorney, so you want to be able to filter that. So there's a way we deal with that. So here's a recent implementation we did. It's just about to release, taking these folks off of Hubbard 1 and move them onto a contemporary CMS, and also a contemporary search platform. In this case, The beauty is in the people search, we're able to provide a lot of flexibility of taking a large amount of information, it could be people, it could be news articles, it could be publications, and narrow it based on, in this case, specific attributes. So by department, by office. Many of you have offices around the world. You may want to find people that work both in Hong Kong and in Boston, for example. Who are these people that work in Hong Kong and Boston? I need someone like that. By position, by language, I need someone that can speak Cantonese as well as German, for example. So we give people the opportunity to really have a lot of control over getting to the information. This goes back to merchandising. No different than an e-commerce site. You go on Zappos, you're looking for that pair of shoes. People are looking for people as well. And we're going to be providing more of these type of mechanisms for you to kind of narrow down to who you want to meet. So the other thing that we have countered, and this is another statistic, so Jakob Nielsen is kind of a world-renowned user experience expert, and search is a big part of user experience. And one of the statistics he said is like basically 50% of the people that come to your site, if they're unable to find what they need in that first search, the first time they type something in and hit submit, they can't find it, they'll walk away. You're right there, you're at the 50% bounce rate. You've lost them. So what we also see then, and these are things that he has tested, is sometimes you get people that try once again to see if they can get something out of your search engine. And if they don't get it, definitely 32% of those are left. And finally, one more time, if they don't get it, you might be left with 18% of those people that are left poking around your site, trying to find it somewhere through the maze of hierarchy. So what we want to get to is that first-time satisfactory search, which means if we can get them the first time, we kind of have a hold of them. We know they're not going to be leaving anytime soon. We can begin to engage them on the site. And there's a couple ways to get that. We want to get it right the first time. Simple things. And again, this is the examples out of things that we have recently built. Auto-suggest or auto-complete, depending on who you are. Being able to type in a few letters of a name or letters of maybe matters or whatever it is to kind of lead you down a certain road and give you the options right there to show you what's available. Synonyms, making smart substitutions. Autocorrect. Here I purposely typed in competition Lu, not competition law, but L-U-W. And you can see the search result came back at the very top. There was, I think it might have been an event, Competition Law 2011. So again, the search engine was good enough to make that change on the fly and not inconvenience me when I was looking for competition law. Then the other is allowing people to enter complex phrases, multiple words, much like you do in Google. People want that same experience. Google has set the bar for search. And in that respect, we have to actually respect that and make sure that we are minimally kind of at the same level. In multi-word searches are definitely a big part of it, making sure we get the right relevancy, bring up the right results. So let's talk about client acquisition. We're talking about an industry that has not always looked toward digital as a way to acquire clients. We believe that's changing. It may not be changing for all of you right away, but I know we speak with marketing teams, we speak with CMOs and organizations, we speak with biz dev people, and believe it or not, someone's even used the S word, sales, within a large law firm. So we understand that things are changing. We understand that people are realizing that the mechanisms and the ways of doing things in other professional services firms outside of law that involve digital engagement, pushing people through a buying cycle, and all those kind of almost traditional sales and marketing things actually also apply to law at some level, especially if you're looking towards new customers or new clients, excuse me. So what we really want to do is look at ways to engage people, get people thinking about you, get people involved with your firm. 80% of executives aged 50 or below will use the internet daily to seek for business information. Why aren't they going to your site to seek business information? Why shouldn't you bolster your brand? Why shouldn't you make and highlight your attorneys as experts around certain problem spaces? There's ways we can do that, and we're starting to do that for a lot of firms now. 2 million regular readers of McKinsey. Many of you folks know McKinsey from a professional services perspective, a management consultant firm. And here's a great example of a professional service organization. They've done a huge job around growing their base of fans, growing their base of readers around their thought leadership material. And so that brand is now very strong. When people have a problem or a question that are engaged with McKinsey, McKinsey is top of mind for them. So what we're looking to do with a lot of folks right now is look at client acquisition through the web and use this notion of thought leadership marketing. And I know many of you are probably familiar with it. If you're not, you've at least heard about it and discussed it within the firm. People have brought it up. And there's a couple ways of doing that. White papers that focus around specific subject areas, webinars, again, your thought leadership, many times the same information that you have in the white papers, you'll put out through a webinar. Very much like I'm doing now. You heard Kamia earlier, she's our marketing manager. We're actually probably going to build a small white paper around this same subject matter and put it up on our website. Events. And these could be then physical events. Again, you can leverage the same information. Blogs and forums. The forums are a little different. I know they are something that is fairly new to a lot of firms, and many firms are kind of pushing that out and not ready to tackle the whole notion of social. But in certain situations, it can make a lot of sense. What is thought leadership? And this came from Gartner. Really it is about creating valuable information that other people find valuable enough that when they come to your website, they desire to download that white paper or register for that webinar, but give something up of themselves. They're going to tell you their name. They're going to tell you their email address. They're going to tell you perhaps their industry, their vertical that they're in, okay? Maybe the problem that they have. They might tell you that implicitly just based on the fact that they downloaded an IP-related white paper. So that's what we're after. It's kind of this trade. We want to give something to them of high value, so they're willing to give, ideally, their email address and some basic information about them. And for another webinar, but we could begin that virtuous cycle of a nurturing campaign through Concept or Ticket or Marketo or Eloqua or whatever you have to engage them from the email channel perspective. But this is a great way to start that. So how do we make thought leadership marketing matter to our clients? Well, a couple things. I'm not going to get into details here, but these are kind of takeaways for you folks. And that's around things like, take a stand on point of view. Create value by telling people things that they don't already know. Become vertically famous. There are some attorneys out there that are so well known in certain verticals that, that's the first place people turn. So go ahead and walk through this, and we find that these are very useful. The other thing is that, much like with the bios that we talked about, search engines and being able to make these findable, make your papers findable, and so on, is important. We use a lot of tools. There's tools out there called Google Insight, Google Trends, that guide us a little bit as to what some of the popular search terms are, what to use when we write that little description paragraph. Remember, 150 characters, we better get it right. And so we want to be able to kind of massage
massage that and get the right words in there. Make sure that you gate your content. What you're after is the registration. That's gold. That's what you want to start your marketing against. Follow up with email, that closed-loop marketing that we talked about, so creating that nurturing relationship through the digital channels before you introduce them at some point or before they pick up the phone and call someone, call a partner. Talk a little bit about microsites, and some of these kind of cross over. But I know a lot of firms have microsites. We're big believers in that. And we believe that most people now, especially some of the newer customers, they're going to do a search on Google, even though they may know an attorney or two. They still want to find out, what are my alternatives? We see microsites kind of focus on two things, either task-oriented or message-focused. In other words, you go to it to accomplish certain tasks, like register for an event, or maybe use it to drive certain messages, like thought leadership. It could be anything from 1 to 2 pages, like lead capture or pay-per-click campaigns that might drive people here. But larger microsites are very common too, anywhere from 10 to 20, 30 pages that support specific branding, SEO campaigns, that provide a lot more traction from a search and findability perspective, that have targeted messages. Maybe around certain thought leadership particularly, maybe involving multiple attorneys in a certain practice area that you want to push or maybe test out in the market. You know, there are attorneys that have their own sites to basically communicate their skills and so on. Some of them are part of firms. Other people obviously are independents, but more people that are working for firms, very much like a LinkedIn page, are also looking at that personal microsite. Now, that personal microsite could be something that definitely complements the main site and even carries over some of the branding, but allows a bit more freedom in terms of the amount of content and so on. The other point I want to bring out here is it can become a blogging platform where you may not want to introduce blogging into your main site. This microsite now allows this person to kind of focus on, let's say, certain subject matters that they're interested in, communicating with their not only clients but prospects out there, and responding to them in kind of this very focused environment, right? And the brand is really about them rather than the firm at large. Practice microsites. We're seeing a lot of kind of focused practices and maybe some niche markets where they want to try and test and see what traction they get in the market before they actually roll it into the main site. But again, from an SEO perspective, from a findability perspective, there's a lot of value in breaking that out separately. One thing to consider, you know, we don't want to duplicate content in these microsites that you may already have in your main site. That is a big no-no. Google will basically punish you for that by significantly reducing your ranking on both the microsite and your main site. So the content that you write for these microsites, though it can be the same subject matter, does need to be original content. In other words, don't copy and paste content. Google is aware of that. They say these guys are trying to pull a quick one on us and try to increase the ranking. And so for that, we're just going to kind of push them down. So make sure that you always have someone review that. And the other thing, we find that there's a lot of firms that have 10, 20, 30 multi-page microsites out there. And yeah, we never use those anymore. They're just sitting out there. They could be a real reason why some of the rankings might be lower than you expect. There may be duplicate content out there that you may not even realize. I would highly recommend you kind of go through those, inventory them, see what's out there. If you really don't need them, shut them down. So as we move forward, let's talk about our final subject. I know we're about to run out of time here. Mobile, the big one. And we get a lot of questions, and frankly, all the firms that we work with now, mobile is a big part of the overall strategy. mobile really constitutes more than just smartphones. Here you can see that 1/4 basically of smartphone users use tablets. And questions we get around mobile apps, there's pros and cons. But frankly, 90% of the time we find that there's no need for a mobile app. People really can focus on what we call a mobile optimized website, and there's certain ways of accomplishing that now so that the effort that goes into building that can also be leveraged across all platforms. Here's a great example of a mobile optimized site. This is a firm out of Vancouver, Canada. And you can see how beautifully they've organized that. It's perfect, simple menus, really clean. They've got full functionality on the site. But we really need to ask ourselves, do we even need full functionality on these mobile optimized sites? A lot of folks, when they have the phone in hand, are really just after address, a map, phone number, forgot that guy's name, these type of things. And we can look at the analytics and even determine what people want to do. We've taken on a strategy, and we're communicating this to our clients. It's called Mobile First. This is not something we've come up with. It's kind of an industry approach. And it's really about thinking about your website from a mobile perspective first and growing it out from there, so that we don't kind of put the cart before the horse, which is what we've done, building these websites for desktops, and now with all these tablets and mobile devices, kind of scratching our heads figuring out how to make this work well. So with Mobile First, there's a lot of opportunity, because once we have that mindset, sky's the limit. New devices come out, new form factors come out, and the designs are designed to be responsive and adaptive to those new form factors of devices. We have to be aware of the constraints, and that's part of building the correct thing. And then new capabilities are coming out all the time in mobile devices that we can begin to leverage. So what we use is this notion called responsive design. We think of one website. We don't think of a separate mobile site. There's one site that we work on. Mobile and desktop is the same. It's really based on some new technologies that have come out over the last year and a half. They're being adopted very quickly. And the value is it really kind of begins to future-proof what we build. Here's some great examples. Illy, all you folks probably know Illy Coffee. Here's an example of a site where we go from desktop to tablet to smartphone. Another one here that I would highly recommend, many of you probably know the Boston Globe if you're from Boston, but if you don't, I would say go there. It's a great example, one of the best examples that I know of responsive design, where you can actually take your browser window and shrink it and see how beautifully they kind of begin to change the site into something that could run on a smartphone. So only about 20%, 1 out of 5 of the AmLaw list, the 2011 AmLaw list, have mobile sites. There's a lot of opportunity. Here, Thorstenson's is the same outfit out of Vancouver. Here's an example of their site as it goes from desktop to tablet and so on. So anyway, that is it for today. It's kind of an informal discussion. Here are details about myself. You can always contact me at rolf.kraus@edynamic.net. I'd be glad to chat with you folks. And I think we might be ready for some questions if there are some questions. I know we're running over time. Kamia, are we able to take any additional questions or not?
Well, we do have a lot of questions, and we are running out of time, but I think we can take a couple of them. The first question is, we are going to implement a new website. What should be our next steps?
Yeah, that's a great question. Implementing a website really depends on where you're coming from and where you want to go to. I know a lot of folks that we work with now, the firms have, as I had mentioned, a legacy system like a Hubbard or an older CMS, a custom CMS that they're coming from. One of the things that we like to do is not look at the website as the only component within an overall digital ecosystem. We think of marketing, as particularly digital marketing, as typically being multi-channel, meaning that we're going to try to engage people through the web channel. Obviously, mobile is part of that, email channel, and potentially social and other mechanisms that are out there. And so before we actually get to implementing a website, kind of taking it, migrating it, building the new design, and so on, we really want to understand what's the overall capabilities you want to have from a digital marketing perspective, kind of roll that in, put a plan together. So we typically spend anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks doing what we call a digital strategy transformation project, where we look at and begin to understand overall capabilities, the desires of various stakeholders within the organization, marketing objectives, how you engage with your clients, where you engage with your clients. And obviously there's a lot of similarity between firms, but there's also differences. And we want to capture that and resolve that down into what eventually becomes a roadmap, where the website is a component of the overall roadmap. You might focus on the website first and other things later. But that's typically how we start, rather than diving into building a site or designing a site right away. We prefer to focus on the strategy, which really informs the approach.
The next question is, what kind of tool can a law firm use to offer this kind of search capability, autocorrect, etc.?
Okay, Tanya, could you repeat that? You broke up.
So the question is, what kind of tool can a law firm use to offer this kind of search capability that includes autocorrect, etc.?
Okay. Yeah, I'm having difficulty hearing you. So I think it's also getting a little late. We're about 5 minutes over. So I would say of any of these questions, I'd be glad to respond to people via email, and we know where the questions are coming from. And we appreciate your time today in joining us. And I believe Tanya is going to make this presentation available, and then watch for the next in the series. There's a lot of things we didn't cover today. I know there's a lot of mergers going on, a lot of globalization. People are, companies, firms are growing from a global perspective, and that in and of itself is a whole other discussion from a website perspective that we have yet to tackle, and I'd love to do that in the next session. So thank you very much for your time today, folks.
Everyone.
The